so they don't do anything about it. But I think that sometimes there can be, if you talk to people, but I agree that a lot of times like people aren't thinking about, maybe not even just out of like maliciousness, like they're not aware.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that would like to? Oh, I see some more hands. Sean, go ahead.
Victoria just said is like a utopia, ethical world, which I agree. Hard to I mean, just use the word create. Who create? God or government? Who created ethical world? Apparently, if we can create not just an ethical or fair world, we have to have a government. We have to have an ethical government. Government have to involve. However, American culture more emphasizes on individualism. American doesn't like government. They think government is evil. Okay. A lot of people they talk about government. They think government is bad. Government is evil. To me, is bullshit. Reagan said, "U.S. right? Government is not a solution. Government is a problem. That's a bullshit." So I don't know.
Thank you, Sean. Kelly, you wanted to say something short and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm from New Jersey, and I found this topic is very interesting. I want to see. I'm really interested to know what other people have to say, because we are human being. Our nature is really vicious and selfish. So only we can do is keep trying to be nice, be ethical.
Okay, thank you. Jacob, you wanted to say hello?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? So, is there such a thing as more ethical, right? Either you're ethical or you're not. You're at some level of being not ethical, right? So to be not ethical has many levels, many degrees. But to be ethical has no opposite, has no levels. The thing is, what will give birth to making us ethical? Not just temporarily, but 24/7. When we go to work, when we go to school, wherever we go, right? We are the very embodiment of ethics, morality, the sacred. You get it? The holiness. So what is the one action that if we all do it now, it will happen? And again, not temporarily, and beginning with the children at the earliest age. So yes, it is possible. Yes, of course. Not to be more, but to be ethical.
That sounds wonderful, Jacob. We have lots of people coming in. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves? And is an ethical world possible, or yes or no? I see Jose wants to say something. Hello.
Yes. Do we know what being ethical is? It's the question I ask myself. I mean, I hear, oh, be nice, or be this or be that. I mean, the simple approach to ethics is is basically knowing or acting in not acting wrongly, acting in a proper way. And then the question is, well, whose proper way? Who's right or who's wrong? In other words, when I act ethically, what's the standard I'm following? My own, my family, my country, my neighborhood? Whose standard of ethics is the one that I'm following? So this is where, when I look at the root causes of the lack of ethics in today's time, it comes from a view that says everybody has a different view of what being ethical is about. I mean, the individualist thing is very ethical to just look after yourself in survival mode and I win, you lose type of approach. But to answer the question, is it possible? Yes, it is possible. And it starts, as I think Jacob was saying, it starts from the children. I mean, I'm not going to change the people in this meetup, although there may be some changes. But it starts with every one of us. I mean, we talk about society like it's an entity separate from us. Oh, we cannot change, we cannot change, we cannot change. I mean, nobody's asking you to change the world. You start by changing yourself and questioning yourself. Are you being ethical in every act? And Jacob is right as well in the sense that there is no shades of gray in being ethical. There's no, I am a little more honest than you are. Or I'm a little less dishonest than you are. I mean, either I'm honest or I'm not. Either I'm a principled, based actor or I'm not. So, my 2 points are, yes, it is possible. Yes, it has to start with the children of today. And if we want to do something today for others, change you personally, individually, and be the example of what others should follow, because we can all hide behind the enormous mass of people that surround us that are mostly unethical. That's all.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in to our conversation here and introduce yourselves?
Well, I'll say something if there's pause there. Hello. Oh, what happened there?
That's great.
You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. All right.
Sorry, give me 1 second.
So I just couldn't read what it was.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. I was locking things down and went too far. So I need to make you a co-host, by the way. I'll do that.
There were a few Zoom bombers recently in a meeting I was in. There were some young guys starting out. They're trying to copy the format of those other guys that have been around for a while. They're saying exactly the same things, but I said to them, guys, you're not as good as the others. Just you've got your business model wrong. Give up. And then they just started.
Time to go to Zoom Bomber University, kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess as well, I suppose like Jacob was saying, we need, I mean, the Dalai Lama said if children learn to meditate worldwide, we'd stop all conflict within one generation, which sounds ideal. But yeah, I think like it's got to be just that grassroots drastic change at the base level. I was thinking recently, like we put a man on the moon. When did we put a man on the moon? Or you guys in America put a man on the moon?
69. 1969.
69 to put a man on the moon, but we still can't stop people starving. We can create ChatGPT and this fantastic technology that we have, but still little kids are dying all over the world of starvation. What's wrong? Anyway.
What's wrong with the universe? Yes.
Yeah, you'd think like if everybody really put their minds to it, we could do it, but it just seems too hard for most people. Like everyone's got their own problems in their life as well. And I think for most people, life's just so hard. They haven't got time to think about anyone else, even in their own environment. A lot of people, not everyone.
It's not human nature to be that concerned with people who have nothing, we're not interacting with directly.
Yep. Yeah, not what I mean, it is in some people. Some people have a very strong sense of compassion and sensitivity, but what happens is often they go under. They get so overwhelmed with the problems of the world, they have nervous breakdowns and they can't function.
Exactly. So it shows you humans shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. Yep. It's about balance. The Buddhists talk about, well, a bodhicitta, which is somebody who sort of takes on the practice of the Buddhist way. They want to eliminate suffering in the world, but they don't see the suffering in the world, because if they see it, they become part of it, because they become afflicted by it. So they're trying to rectify suffering, but they're not seeing it. Same as a surgeon or a policeman, if they associate too much with what they're trying to deal with, then they end up becoming part of the problem as well. They can't help anyone. I think it's just at that base level, we've got to radically change our perspective and our values in life. And it's not all about the dollar.
So what will give birth, what will allow you to be ethical? Now, not later, now. What is the one action that if you do it now, will bring about ethical movement, ethical, intelligent, orderly action in your life? Because if there is to be a change in the world, it must begin with you, right? If you're messed up, if you're confused, if you're full of conflict, if you have disorders, disturbances, mental, emotional, right? You are the world and the world is you. So it begins with you, right? So what is the one action that will bring forth, that will make me capable of ethics, morality?
We're going to get into that. I'm going to make my argument for it in the presentation, Jacob. So I'm glad you're asking, because right now it's a good lead in, because it's time for our presentation. And I just have one or two more things to do. I don't know if you want to answer your own question, Jacob. If you feel like you have the answer, feel free to answer it. And I'll take one more minute to do it. I want to add the agenda to the night because I sometimes forget to update it. So
I think Jose wanted to say something too.
Well, Jacob was going to, I thought Jacob was going to give the answer.
Yes, yes,
He was
please
leading
do. And
to
then
the answer, in his opinion.
Right. What the starting point is, the starting and end point, which are both the same, is self-awareness. I have to be aware of what is happening now in this room, right? In this moment, right? What is happening, right? To be aware of it non-intellectually, right? Without words, without comparison, without analysis, without evaluation, without recording. That means you're really listening, right? You're really paying attention. In that quality of attention, you see the truth. It's an immediate perception of truth, right? It's an insight, like being hit by a lightning bolt, which then sets you free. And then freedom acts. And the action of freedom is ethics, is moral action.
Wow, that's sufficiently vague. I have no idea.
Well, begin at the beginning, which is, are you aware that you are trapped, that you're mentally, emotionally a slave to the
Yes,
past,
I am what I
your
am.
conditioning, your programming?
Sure.
The I is the program, and the brain body is identifying with it. It's under a delusion that there is a me, a self, an I, right? And I cannot live without it. It's under two delusions, right? So can the brain, right, see this, see it not intellectually, but see it at the level of the bones, the DNA, the blood, right? At the visceral level, see that it is occupied. And I'm saying, if you don't run, if you don't hide, if you don't seek an escape, if you're still, just be with it, right? The very being with it sets you free, brings about this freedom, the freedom of the brain. That means no mind, right? Quiet, silence, emptiness. Then whatever you do is the action of that silence, that tranquility. And that's what we call ethical, moral action, the sacred, the movement of the sacred, the holy, the holistic movement. It's a holistic movement. So to be aware of what is happening now, that is the one act.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Jose, did you want to say something quickly while Garrett's getting ready?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what David said, which is interesting in the sense that is what are we innately? So what are we when we are born? And David was suggesting, but that maybe we are innately selfish or a version of that. I think in part he is right. My sense is that when we are born, we have two opposing forces. One is survival, which is evolutionary. We all somehow have this self-preservation instinct. And in this society, that is not quite making sure that the tiger doesn't eat you, but in this society is manifested as other people, competition. I have to win, you have to lose, because my survival relies on me being successful. And the other opposing force, I think, is the one that comes also innately, which is your sense of right and wrong. That gets very distorted as you grow up because of all the evidence you see in front of you and your own interpretations of what you see, right? If somebody is a bully and gets what they want, well, you learn that maybe being a bully, you can get what you want. Right? But I think innately we have those two opposing forces that we need to balance: self-preservation, survival, and the more ethical individual that can tell right from wrong. And then life happens. That's all.
Great. A lot of good comments made. Thank you all for those. And I have a short presentation today, probably at least short in terms of the number of slides, but it may take a little time to get through. Let me pull up my notes. All right. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. So my name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, now an entrepreneur. And my hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy. I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute. Tonight's event is brought to you by the Freethinker Institute, which is a not-for-profit looking to support and empower its members. We want to help people be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and be fair through transformational, personal, and professional development. We have pre-events like this one every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we have weekly members-only events that are focused on applying practical philosophy into our daily lives, sort of a peer learning group, and we have a curriculum as well. And then we have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. I do recommend, trying to keep calm, cool, and collected, especially if you disagree strongly with someone. Try to do what we call at the FTI listening to understand, which is trying to ask them questions to understand where they're coming from rather than to try to prove them wrong. We learn a lot more by empathizing with other people and trying to understand where they're coming from than we do by trying to prove to them that we're more right than they are. We may just learn that they have better reasons for their beliefs than we have for ours, in which case we have a new, better belief to believe in. So that said, there are a lot of sources of wisdom about what it means to create a better world, and some of the people mentioned earlier that it talks about that we should start by improving ourselves. I agree with that, but there are also other things that we can do in addition to improving ourselves, and there's particular guidance in improving ourselves that we can use, and so I'll touch on some of that this evening. this is a near and dear topic to me, because the reason I started a not-for-profit, similar to other people that started not-for-profits, is to create a better world. And so I guess for me, a more ethical world is a better world. I guess we'll get into the the definition of ethics. That'll be where I start. I will say we have a general guideline as far as like what it means to be polite in terms of asking questions and making comments. And we like to ask people to stick to one comment or question per time that you raise your hand. And that way, people will all get a chance to talk, and we can rotate through after you ask your question or make your comment. You can raise, drop your hand and then raise it again immediately, and then you'll go right to the end of the line. But that way we can go to one question at a time or comment at a time. If someone wants to respond, we're gonna sort of try a new thing here, because I like to let people respond to other comments from people. I usually try to interact with whoever asks a question, but we also want to let people interact with each other. And so if you have a comment that you want to make, but your hand isn't, you're not next in line, you can try to do the reactions. And I think under reactions, there should be where is it?
Maybe they can pick an emoji, anyone is fine.
Well, why don't we just yeah, I mean, I would like to come up with a reaction that will be like why don't we just take like the hand pointing to the right or something like that, which is one of the ones near the top of the smileys and people emojis. That may be too hard. Why don't we just do like do the party? Yeah, checkbox is good, but do the little party. And if you do the little party, then I'm gonna assume that you want to have a party with the person who just talked and make a comment on what they said. And if I don't have something to say immediately beforehand, I'll let you speak. And yeah, good to practice that. Throw a little party for yourself and for all of us. And when you do the little party icon, that'll mean you want to comment on what that person just said. And I'm going to try to pay attention to that and make sure that people who want to comment on what someone just said can get a word in, so we can have a little bit of back and forth conversation, not just between me and the person asking questions, but between all of you and each other as well. And we always welcome, the name of the organization is the Free Thinker Institute, because we really want diverse ideas. And everybody's entitled to, share whatever opinions they want, as long as they're shared politely. I would just ask everyone to hold questions till the end of the presentation. We'll have plenty of time for conversation. I think that's everything before I get started. Am I missing anything else? All right, so then let me share my screen. So on creating a more ethical world. So first, an agenda. We're going to do, I did the intro to the Free Thinker Institute, so I'll skip past that. I'm going to define what it means to be ethical, and what it would mean if there was no more ethical or less ethical, which a lot of people in the modern world argue that all morality, which is essentially a synonym for ethical, is moral. All morality is totally subjective, and that there's no right or wrong answer there. I'm not going to make the full argument that there is a right answer there, but I'm going to sort of give you a proposal for what I'm talking about when I talk about in terms of ethical. And I think it'll be one that resonates with almost all of you, if not all of you. Although if anyone doesn't think that that's a more ethical way of being or a way of defining what's more ethical, that's fairly agreeable. I welcome people who want to, come up with an alternative or a concern with that definition. But for the purposes of the presentation, I had to use a version, and so I used the best one that I've been able to come up with, which is which I'll go into. The next is a lot of people talked about, getting ourselves to a good place first. I do think we need to do that, and then I'm going to talk about helping other people get to a good place. And then how we can, use our influence to make the world a better place through a couple of other mechanisms. So that said, definition of what is ethical, it means pertaining to or dealing with morals or the principles of morality pertaining to right or wrong in conduct. So you see, like, even the definition of ethical is essentially a synonym of moral. The interesting thing is that morality has been largely talked about by religions. And so people generally that are not religious generally don't like the word moral, but they're more open to ethical, which is why tonight's title was about ethical. But I do just want to be clear, all it really means is that there are right things to do in the world and there are wrong things to do, and that there are, you know, better and worse things to do in decisions that you can make and actions that you can take in life. And I'm going to make the argument that there really are, and that if you don't believe that there are any better or worse actions to take in life, there are a few logical implications of this, which I think you'll find pretty reprehensible. It would mean that there would have to be no laws, because laws are really society's enforcement of what we agree are right action according to society. So murder could not be illegal if you don't believe that there's any right and wrong, or that there's any, you know, largely agreeable version of right and wrong. Murder would not be able to be illegal because you shouldn't logically have any sort of concept of right and wrong. Killing a person who's done nothing wrong, poses no threat to anyone, and does not want to die might at times be right action. And I can't think of any such perspective. If anyone has one, feel free to raise your hand now. The other sort of universally agreeable moral to me is like raping a child, and it, you know, is always wrong to me. I think that any reasonable person would agree with both of those, number 2 and number 3. And so hopefully we can agree that there are certain things that are just universally right or wrong in certain scenarios. And for today's conversation, what I'm going to consider right action is a generalized rule that these are like the extremes of, which is increasing happiness and decreasing harm is a universally or a nearly universally appealing thing. There are people who don't agree with it, but I would argue all reasonable people would agree with that. That's another conversation for another night. I'm not going to logically defend that today because that's a whole nother can of worms. We're just going to use the definition for the presentation to say that I think increasing happiness and decreasing harm is a good thing. If anyone wants to shoot holes in that, I have a more nuanced set of definitions and you know, a 2-step rule that I follow to sort of riff on utilitarianism, which is essentially where this came from, although I independently invented it without knowing it already was invented by utilitarians a couple hundred years ago from Bentham. And essentially, you know, that's what I'm going to be talking about when I say a more ethical world. So increasing happiness and decreasing harm. So that said, first we have to help ourselves. You'll notice all of us that have flown in an airplane have heard the message, you have to put on your own mask before you help others. That's because if you can't breathe anymore, you can't help anyone else. And if you try to put your kid's mask on before you put your own mask on, you could end up dying and killing your kids too, because you couldn't get your mask on and their masks on because you tried to put theirs on first. So that's why everyone is supposed to put their own mask on first. It sort of makes sense and is generalizable, I think, in life in general. If your own needs aren't met, then you're not going to be as effective at helping others. And so, you know, even if you want to help others, like if you don't meet your own needs, you know, your essential needs, then you're not going to be very effective at helping others. I would argue that the 5 intentions of the Freethinker Institute are basically, you know, I've thought long and hard about a simple set of rules that will help people live a happier life. And that's really what I came to the conclusion of, is the 5 intentions after lots and lots of time and effort and discussion and feedback. And there's always more room for feedback. If anyone doesn't like these, you can give me feedback on that too. But one is, and these are in priority order, is a devotion to using reason and intuition to be the best version of yourself, to seek truth and to be fair. The number 2 intention is to be transparent about who you are and what you believe to the extent you trust someone, and to have an open mind towards new ideas that will help you be the best version of yourself, seek truth and be fair. Because so many people get stuck in confirmation bias, and we aren't able to help ourselves because we're stuck in bad beliefs or with misunderstandings about the world. And so having an open mind helps us learn and we'll talk more about learning. Number 3 of the 5 intentions is a commitment to critical thinking, because we want to better be able to distinguish fact from folly, and fact from fiction, and wisdom from folly. And critical thinking skills help us do that. And I think ultimately everyone should rely on their own critical thinking skills first and foremost. But to do that, we have to make sure we have good critical thinking skills so that we can rely on ourselves. And so one of the main goals of the Freethinker Institute is to teach people better critical thinking skills so we can all make better decisions about the world. And we'll talk more about that later too. The next one is an attempt to maximize happiness while minimizing harm. So that's, the reason that it's part of the 5 intentions is because I think it's a pretty agreeable thing that I haven't heard any good reasons to find is not agreeable in terms of making the world a better place and being more ethical to do that. And then I also include empowering others who do the same, which we'll come back to later in the presentation. And then the last is an eagerness to give and receive love, because we all want to be loved. So why not put more love into the world, both platonic and as well as romantic. So those are the 5 intentions. And I would argue that those are a good way to get yourself to a better place if you follow those general rules. In doing so, you'll also increase your sphere of influence and be able to influence more people more effectively. The other thing that I think is really important is, listening to understand, and that was mentioned in the social, and I mentioned it in the intro, is really empathizing with other people and trying to understand where they're coming from. I think way too often people jump immediately, they hear what someone says at the surface level, and they immediately jump to disagreeing and why the other person is wrong. And you can see this on social media all the time, and you can even see it in person a lot of the time, especially now with politics being as divisive as it is. And it's really a shame, because I think we learn so much more by listening to why someone else has the perspective that they do than we do by telling them that they're wrong. And usually telling someone that they're wrong is not going to convince them that they're wrong. Most of the time that just gets them to double down on their opinion and become more stubborn in their beliefs and become less open-minded. It's when we ask other people to explain to us why they think what they think, that maybe if we can ask them questions that lead them to believe that their own beliefs are wrong because they couldn't come up with good answers to your questions, then their mind is going to be open to a new, different belief. And that's the point at which you could say, well, is this another alternative that might resonate with you? And then maybe their mind will be more open if you come at it from from that perspective, from a place of empathy and trying to understand them before trying to convince them. I would argue that the purpose of life is learning. I made that argument another night, so I won't make it today, but I would say let's learn together. I think like learning is always going to benefit you if you're learning more knowledge and wisdom. And I distinguish knowledge as knowledge about the objective reality. And wisdom is about how to make better decisions, which I would argue are decisions that increase happiness and decrease harm. And the better we can learn about that and how to make better decisions and learn more about the world, those are 2 synergistic effects. Also, from a financial perspective, one of the things that we try to do in the FTI and that I do is I teach a product management boot camp for people that want to learn how to invent software, which is what I've done most of my career, most of the last, 20 of the last 25 years or so. And so for anyone that wants to do something like that with the FTI, feel free to, where they train other people in how to, do their job or to be skilled at their skill set. We want to help people reach financial independence. And so that's why I do that. And anyone that wants to collaborate in creating an educational community where we can, help give people opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have to do a job that they're passionate about, would love to chat with people about that. So, and that probably should have gone under the helping others. So the other part is, I like to say, if we don't help each other, who will help us? And when I say it that way, it sounds so simple and so obvious, but it's true. Like if we don't help each other, why would other people be there to help us? The only way someone is going to help us is if they're helping each other, right? And so I would argue that, we, as a not-for-profit, we have a membership track, which creates like a peer group of people that really helps each other guide ourselves to be in a better place ourselves, and gives peer feedback to each other, so that we're collaborating in sort of increasing happiness and decreasing harm for people in the community. And we break up into pods of 10 or fewer people, 3 to 10 people essentially. And we get to know each other, at a pretty profound level, and try to help each other achieve life goals and be better versions of ourselves, and seek truth and be fair. And that helps us increase our sphere of influence through that collaborative relationship, or set of collaborative relationships that we create. And we have a bunch of tools that we use in the member section to help each other get to know each other really well. For anyone that's interested in that, I think Ellis will probably post information in the chat about membership. So a few simple ways that you can make the world better. I think improving critical thinking skills, I said we'd touch on this again, is key, because if you don't have good critical thinking skills, you'll have more misunderstandings about the world. And the more misunderstandings about the world that you have, the less likely you are to make good decisions. And our meetups, both on Tuesday evenings, like this event, as well as on the membership track, focus on improving critical thinking skills, because that's really near and dear to me. Is like, I think that ultimately, we can only be successful as a community if people can think clearly and see the truth clearly. And I would argue, when speaking of which, when either voting for politicians and or choosing who to support amongst colleagues and friends, I think we should choose people who are choose to support people who are good human beings that are honest and have a record and the intent of increasing happiness and decreasing harm in the world. And the more we support such people, the more influence we grant to such people. And if they in turn use that to grant it to more people as well, then we end up increasing happiness and decreasing harm in the world, which I would argue is, as I said, pretty universally appealing. There's also a pretty cool app that I came across, and it's called A Better World, and it rates how ethical companies are. And this is something that when I held this event a couple of years ago, before I started the organization, I held it through my philosophy meetup, which was a part of Socrates Cafe Network. This was the main idea I thought of about how to make the world a better place. And that is, if you spend your money with ethical companies, and then let's take it further, if we all spend our money with ethical companies, the unethical companies will go bankrupt because they'll have no customers, because they'll realize that by being so unethical, they're not going to have any customers, and those companies will start looking for, and we'll also empower the companies that are ethical companies, will help them grow and be more successful. And so the management that created more ethical companies will actually now have the management of the unethical companies coming to them for work. And so now the bosses are the ones that are leading the ethical charge rather than the unethical charge. And in doing that, we can, as a community of purchasers, which we're all buying products every day, we live in a consumer economy. And so when we spend our dollars, if we spend them on, with ethical companies, we use our influence to positively influence the world, $1 at a time. So that's a small, doesn't take a lot of effort to do. You look up a company that you're going to buy from in A Better World, and you look up alternatives, and you see, do a little bit of research about who the most ethical provider of a product or service is, and you try to learn about it where you can. And you can't always get a clear read on this, but where you can get a clear read, I'd argue you're better off spending your money on the more ethical companies if you can afford to. So that's part of why the helping yourself and becoming, in a good place financially allows you to increase your sphere of influence, and then be able to spend on a slightly higher cost product from a more ethical company. If you're scraping to make ends meet, then that may not be an option for you. But if that's the case, then consider getting involved in the Freethinker Institute membership, and we'll try to help you get to a better place financially where we can. We have a savings and investment course too that helps, and as part of the curriculum. And so that's really the last slide. So again, very short. I guess that was almost 25 minutes, but we will have an hour and a half of conversation. So I just want to, ask, was this helpful? Did you learn anything? I like to ask that. And then I'm going to go ahead and, if you can put in the chat whether or not you learned anything useful, any useful tidbits, I would love to know. I would love to take questions or alternative opinions for anyone that wants to share them. Just raise your hand in the reactions, or if there are no hands up, feel free to just speak.
Okay, we're opening up discussion. So I would say about 3.5 minutes per person, around there. That'll be great. Thanks. And please raise your hands.
Great. Jacob, go ahead.
Ask yourself this question. Is the action of ethical action, does it come from thinking? Thinking, what is thinking? Thinking is the movement of memory, right? The memory is knowledge, right? It's the past, it's the old, it's not what's happening now. So my question is to ask yourself, is ethical action the product of thought, of thinking, the movement of the thinker thinking? Will that give birth to true ethics, right? Or what passes for ethics, right? Your definition of ethics, the other person's definition of ethics, and you're working off a definition, an idea, a concept of what it means, and that is what's acting. So that's what passes for ethics, ethical action, moral action, right? But is there an ethical action, an action, right, which is not the product of thinking? You get it? So when the brain is silent, quiet, therefore attentive, therefore connected and in communication with all beings, right? That brings forth an action. That action is the moral action. It's the action of ethics. And then that intelligence, the intelligence of a brain that is totally free, can use thought to put it into words, to write a poem. But that's secondary, that comes later. And that's not really relevant to anything except maybe to, like I said, write a poem or song about it. What is of the utmost importance is connection, listening, perception, pure perception of the whole, right? Not limited perception, but holistic perception, right? Which then brings forth action, so that the seen without the eyes and the action are one movement. Get it? So ask yourself, is ethical moral action the result of thinking, which is limited because it's based on limited knowledge, or is it the action not of knowledge, but of a silence, stillness? When the brain is quiet, free of the thinker, that's when it happens. You get it? Then you're in the flow. Then all your actions are ethical. It doesn't matter what you do.
Jacob, just try to limit your comment to
Go ahead.
2 or
That's
3
it.
minutes. Yeah, so Jacob, I don't know how you can make a decision without thought other than making a knee-jerk decision. And the knee-jerk decisions tend to be, in my experience, not very good ones. The first response people usually have to a situation, if they're emotionally charged, is the emotional decision. And those are usually bad decisions in my experience. But Darren has a party up, so I want to let him comment on
No,
what
but
you
I have to
said,
respond
if
to
he
what you
wants
said
to.
because you're misrepresenting what I said. I'm saying there's no disturbances. There's no emotional. In other words, it's not a reaction. It's a response. It's a responding, right? Reaction is coming from the past. So we're talking about action, which is coming from direct contact from moment to moment with what is. And knowledge is not interfering with that. You get it? You can later on make it into a memory, right? That you can do, right? But first, freedom to look, freedom to listen, right? That means silence, emptiness. I know nothing. I want nothing.
So Darren wanted to make Darren tried to
go ahead.
make it brief, and then
I think it was
DLJ
DLJ that has a.
Darren partied before DLJ. So
Yeah, I did the party thing. So I think that's if we want to make a short response to the speaker. Okay. I just have a question actually. So Jacob, you don't use the word conscience, but is that what you're referring to, or if not, like how is it related to what you're referring to? Because a lot of what you're saying about like listening and silence and all that, I think some people will think you're referring to something like conscience. So how is it related?
Are you talking about consciousness?
No,
Consciousness?
conscience, like your moral conscience.
Oh, conscience. Yeah.
Yes. Is that what you're referring to? And if not,
No.
How is it related to what you're referring to?
Conscience is still anchored in programming, memory, right? So we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about a brain that is totally free, right? Do you see the difference? Like conscience is still rooted in your programming. So you have a certain conscience, the other person, another, right? You've been programmed differently, right? But you're both programmed, right? So we're talking about a brain that's no longer programmed, that's no longer, right, a slave to the past. Therefore, what? Completely attentive, right? From moment to moment, totally present, right? Listening, right? A quality of listening, which you're not used to, right? Normally, right? Because the me is there, the listener is there, and the listener is comparing,
Jacob,
judging.
we can't keep going back and forth
Okay,
at length. So I want to keep going to Kelly's question.
Oh, I think you missed DLJ. Oops.
DLJ, let's keep it short if we could. I don't want to keep going down this path. Go ahead. Your audio is not coming across very well. We couldn't hear you.
Sorry.
Yep, now I heard you.
Okay, that's better. Sorry. Yeah, the answer to Jacob's question, very short, is no. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Kelly, go ahead.
So I picked up several things from your presentation, but
Great.
I have one comment about the definition of ethics. You said, decrease the harm and increase the happiness. But my question is from whose perspective? And it's not really concrete things. It's all subjective. Even in the old days, ethical standard is very different than what we, consider the ethical, nowadays. So, and, ethic has been changing through, nation to nation, culture to culture, and, different periods. So one time the waging war was okay to sustain because, lacking of the food and, lacking of the resource. It is a survivor, mode to waging war to kill other, just to, conquer other countries. And also, marginalizing the women and children were, it was really ethical. It is reasonably accepted. Okay, so those are things, it's really hard to, say if there is any concrete definition about the, ethical. As I said, it's been changing over the period, and culture to culture is very, different meanings of ethicals, about the ethics.
Yeah, so even if my definition is correct, it will still continue to change, Kelly. And I don't think that that means I don't think the fact that it's changed over time means that there is no more ethical or less ethical. All that means is that we're getting better at understanding what is more ethical and what is less ethical. And if you look at the arc of justice over the last, say, 2,000 years, I would argue, and so would Steven Pinker argued that we live in the safest, healthiest, wealthiest world that has ever existed in Earth's existence. And that's a pretty cool thing. That means we're actually getting better at identifying what is and is not ethical. And so, you know, I would argue we're improving. And actually, you do also touch on a good point, is from what perspective. And I would argue each individual gets to decide how happy they are and whether or not they are sustaining harm. The distinction would be that if someone feels they're sustaining significant harm, then that would need to be a peer agreed upon thing, and go through a court system, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of Darren mentioned that oppressing in the chat, that oppressing minorities, especially smaller ones, often leads to an increase in happiness in the world. First of all, I'm not sure that that's actually true, but even if it were, it doesn't necessarily lead to a decrease in harm. And I did mention there's some nuance to my increased happiness and decreased harm. And I'll share some of that nuance, which is that there are sort of two layers of rules. The first is that we should prevent significant unnecessary harm to anyone. And, the example that he gave was, sort of causing harm to gay people in countries where they're a small minority. I think they're a small minority in every country, but causing harm to gay people, and causing significant unnecessary harm, unnecessary defined as harm that doesn't prevent a greater harm, is always bad. And then once you protect everybody from significant unnecessary harm, then we try to increase happiness and decrease harm. And that two-step argument basically overcomes a lot of the objections people have to utilitarianism, which again, I don't want to go too much into that because it is a rabbit hole. And so I want to stay focused on, if we can, stay focused on how to make the world a more ethical place and ideas that people have for that. I shared a bunch of ideas that I think will make the world a more ethical place. I would love other people to throw out ideas they have. Although if you want to shoot holes in my perspective, you're welcome to do that as well. But I would also love everybody to share their own perspective on how we can make the world a more ethical place, so that we can all listen to understand, from each other. So that said, David, go ahead.
Right, okay. Sorry I had to miss part of that because I had to take a phone call. So I missed part of your presentation, although I've been reviewing documents here. So I know, since harm and happiness can't be measured readily other than by asking someone and talking to them and assuming what they're saying as you interpret, right? It's not necessarily something you can tell by examining their property or wealth. That's just a wild, that's a gross guess.
Yeah.
The other way is to talk about their freedom, their ability to choose, and assuring that they have the maximum ability to make choices and freedom in their life, in as much as it is limited by not harming others, as far as you can tell, by their requests and what they want. Okay, so it's kind of negotiating that. Now, if people are complaining they're being harmed by being made to sell cakes to some people they detest, what do? This is, you say that's not a kind of harm I'm going to consider harm, but that's what they're reporting is hurting them. And we have to say, well, our criteria for not harming are going to be more in line with our liberal perspective of, you can only call it a harm if it limits your what? There's just dilemmas to this. I also was trying to react. Jacob was saying in that I think not defining what we mean by thought and talking about parts of the mind as though everyone knows what you're talking about really leads to a chaotic discussion, and a brain that's totally free to just take perceptions is just purely reactive. And so there's no reflection. So there's no responsibility. I think it's the opposite of morality, the way it, is being described. So to me, it's a total, couldn't make sense, heads or tails of that. Okay.
Thanks, David. And yeah, I agree with you that we can't easily measure people's happiness and harm without communicating with them. And I agree that we should give people more freedom. But to your point about whether, people who say that they're being harmed by selling cakes to people that they don't like, I think in this case, it was gay people that they were having to sell cakes to. That's where I say that the definition of significant unnecessary harm should go to the court system, because a jury of peers that, should be able to decide whether or not harm was significant. And, to me, that's the fairest way to evaluate what is fair and what's not, is to go through the justice system as to whether or not harm is significant.
We know the social justice system has intrinsic heavy biases, and it's a political thing in the United States how biased it is. So you're really recommending that as the way to determine? Wow, there's no standard then. It's just whatever's flying.
There is hundreds of years of standard in the justice system. And if you have a better alternative, I would love to hear what your solution is. Do you have a better alternative?
Well, the Supreme Court has generally in the United States been a very reactionary and conservative force. And only during a small amount of time in the 60s, there was a very liberal court. So yes, there are philosophical discussions to be had about values, which are distinct from American jurisprudence and who's been respected in common law, which is not based on what I would call an ethical standard. It's based on a power historical standard, which is, so no, I don't think there's any bar there, no.
I didn't hear your alternative.
Philosophical discussions, right? Like these.
Right.
But we don't have any authority. So we may come up with things, but we have no authority. And so no way to participate in the social power and discourse. We can just talk amongst ourselves. So there's no way to take what we come up with and use it. So we have no utility in the process. I would say councils of people like this would be one way to do it.
That's essentially what a jury is, right? Is a group of people that are selected, through a very formal process to choose peers that are unbiased and can give a fair trial to someone about whether or not they were harmed.
Yeah, but there's no jury system in the Supreme Court. Yeah, there are fixed courts.
I wasn't saying the Supreme Court. I'm saying the court system in general. Like, I think a jury of peers is where significant harm should be measured, is a jury of peers, not the Supreme Court. You can't obviously take everything to the Supreme Court. Now, if there is a lot of, disagreement, over and over again, then eventually it goes to the Supreme Court. Although I would, but yeah, so, I don't think we're disagreeing as much as you thought we were. So
it's good. It's just the ultimate level of authority turns out to be.
Yeah, no, I get that. And we've had a lot of problems with people lying under oath and getting onto the Supreme Court, even though they lied under oath. We have 2 justices where that happened. So we have a lot of problem. We have one of those 2 justices, is under examination for potential corruption problems, and so there are a lot of problems with the legitimacy of the Supreme Court at this point. And I get where you're coming from with concerns about the Supreme Court, but most of the time these things are handled in the lower courts, although something like that particular case could end up going to the Supreme Court. But yeah, we're not going to solve all of America's problems tonight on this 2-hour Zoom. So Bart, do you want to go next?
Yeah, great question. I think it's extremely difficult to find that one truth that how to be ethical for everyone. A big thing that helps me decide is information, having the best information. And for that, I go to independent journalists. You're looking for answers. I invite as many recommendations as you can offer. Independent journalists who aren't beholden to the echo chambers of their tribe. It's just, we live in such a time of narrative warfare. It's tough to fully believe the narratives that are being pushed out into society. And it's not so black and white. You're encouraging to do no harm. And so you mentioned the homosexual issue, but I mean a bigger issue, and a lot of people are seeing this as, well, we are, when we're saying let's really consider giving children puberty blockers or hormones, we are in trying to ensure that if they've made the wrong choice, that we are protecting them from harm in the future. And the other side is using the exact same point to say, no, you're harming them because, you know, you're not allowing them to be their true self. So it's a very difficult, nuanced conversation.
It is. It is.
And
And
yeah.
go ahead. I didn't mean to
No,
cut you off.
no, that's all. Just and so to get to the heart of it, I think it's just best to have as much solid information as you can. And when these
Yeah.
issues are so new, it's difficult to find.
I agree with you completely, especially on it's a difficult problem to solve, and that going to independent journalists. And also we did another event on one of these Tuesday evenings where we read articles about the same topic from the left, the right, and the center. And I really want to encourage everyone to do that, because when you read the left, the right, and the center, and then you fact check anything that sounds really shocking, and you try to look for an independent source that doesn't have that political bias that agrees with it. And if you don't, you just assume that it's not true. It's eye-opening, and you'll see trends about, you know, let's just say you'll see trends if you follow that process and use your critical thinking skills. And by the way, I didn't say do no harm. I said don't cause significant unnecessary harm. And it's maybe a small distinction, but you know, I think like if there's a school shooter shooting school children and I have a gun, I'm going to shoot that guy, like by all means. And if I kill him, I won't feel bad and I won't get in trouble in a court system, because I'm preventing unnecessary harm by causing harm. And so causing harm is okay as long as you're preventing a, you know, still greater harm by causing it. And I would argue that you know, set of rules that I mentioned are actually what have guided a lot of our laws, you know, since the founding of the country, largely, you know, from utilitarianism, although I think it's gotten more nuanced than that. But that said, I want to let Sarah go. So thank you for your comments, Bart. And I agree, we need to be vigilant and looking for the truth and looking from all perspectives. So Sarah, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Garrett. I like that we kind of came around to what I was going to talk about when I initially raised my hand. But just to comment on, yeah, like you said, the nuance of not necessarily doing no harm, doing the least harm.
Correct.
For a given
harm is what I try to say.
Right. It's still very hard to decide necessarily on some things what is right or wrong or better or worse. But yeah, one thing that I found